Hello, everybody, and welcome to the third installment of the Learning the Avidyne IFD webinar series. Today, we're going to be going over a little bit more in depth as to the info menu, some checklists, some timers, and some other things. So this is our IFD Power User webinar, so I hope you guys enjoy. I'm joined today by a rockstar cast. Tom Harper is going to be with us a little bit later today. Will Reichert over in Pilot and IFD support. Brian Call is the Senior Director of North American Sales and Customer Experience, and they're going to be fielding your questions in the chat. The chat is up and running, so feel free to ask your questions. We'll get to them as we go along in this webinar. And I am going to have a session at the very end where we can get through some Q&A and a couple of live examples. So 2 weeks ago, we started this series off with IFD basics. We went over some knob and button functions, how to use the VHF common nav radios, some basic GPS navigation, flight plans, and some advanced flight plans and airways. Last week, we did a little bit more in depth. We went through IFD Advanced, where we talked about arrivals and departures, intercepting radials, offsets, rubber banding, saving flight plans, holds, and instrument approaches. Well, this week, we're going to be getting into the information and utility section of your IFD, as well as some pilot settings and user options. Some really cool features that I'm excited to share with you guys today. So keep in mind that all of these webinars are going to be available on our website, avidyne.com/training. And we have been putting some of these up on our YouTube channels as well, thanks to some feedback from some of you guys. So be looking out for those. We love giving these webinars, and I hope that you guys are getting at least something out of these webinars, because I sure do have a lot of fun giving these every week. So there is that. So this week, we're going to be getting into how to use the aux setup pages, some pilot settings, user options. We're going to talk about the info page, the utilities page, as well as timers and all the benefits of those, as well as your calculators, what to look for, what to expect to see, and then some checklists. I'll go through the resources and we'll do a Q&A at the end. So diving right in, we're going to get into the aux setup page, and I'm going to talk about a little bit of what those LSKs, or what we call line select keys on the left side of the IFD, are all about. Okay, so on the 5 series IFDs, there are 4 line select keys. On the 4 series, I believe it's 1. No, we still have the 4. That's right. I'm not even looking at 1. Never mind. So getting into this, so your line select keys, I'm going to be talking about these 3 right now. Setting up your data blocks and your data block presets, your data block setup are going to be done by either using presets, using some individual customizing of those slots, or a combination of both. So what I mean by that is, let me go back one here. We do have some data block presets that we can use. I'll get into that in a little bit later, but the next thing I want to talk to you guys about was your different setup pages. So there are 2 different setup pages in your IFD. There's a map setup page and an FMS setup page, and they're both selected by that same line select key. So you toggle line select key, what we would call line select key number 2, going from the bottom to top, 1, 2, 3, 4. This is how you set your different map and your FMS preferences. Now, how we get into this is step 1, we make sure that we are pushing that aux button on the bottom of the bezel. We're in the setup tab, because remember, the IFD has a page and tab user interface. So aux page setup tab, and then depending on whether we want to be in the map setup or in the FMS setup, we'll push that line select key to toggle between the 2. So the IFD is going to display whichever setup page that you're currently on, not what is next if you select that line select key. Notice that if line select key 2 says map setup, you're on the map setup page. If it says FMS setup, you're on the FMS setup page. Then we think this reduces some confusion and increases awareness about where you are in the IFD. So the next thing here is the user options line select key. To get into user options, we're in that same page and tab, aux setup, and then that line select key number 1 is going to be user options. And from here, we can choose from a list of different user options that are selectable within the IFD. Let's move on to the data blocks here. One of the things I want to tell you about the data block layout is the left, top, and right side data blocks are completely customizable with the 5 different user settings that you've got. You've got 5 different users that you can customize within the IFD, and each of those has customizable data blocks for left, top, and right. So obviously the left side data blocks, you see the 2 up top, and then the right side data blocks. And I want to say there's 14 total that you can set at any one time. And of course, your right side data blocks are scrollable if you do choose to have that many data blocks set up at any given time. So we do have a couple of presets set up here. Now how we get into that is we're in that aux button, that setup tab, and on the line select key number 3, we have data block presets. All right, so we make sure that that is visible on the IFD, and we get to our data block presets. What that does is give you a choice of a couple of different presets. Now we can set up the factory default there. We can set up our left block default. We can set it up as a traffic preset, and as well as some custom ones. Now, whether or not we have a remote transponder connected to our IFD, we will get an additional option, which is the transponder preset. Now, that's not going to be visible unless you have a remote transponder wired in and configured on your IFD. So if you have an AXP322, if you have a NGT 9000R, or any one of those remote transponders, you will then see a transponder preset. So here's what those are going to look like with our different types of presets. So if we get to our default preset, our factory default, this is what you're going to see every time when you get a new IFD or if it comes out of the factory. This is the factory default. Okay, we can see on the left side we've got our COM active and our COM standby, our nav active and standby. We do have a decoded nav identifier or VLOC identifier, and then our nav mode tells us what mode that the IFD is currently in. On the top, the left is UTC time, and then AGL attitude as the default data block there. All of these are customizable, and then the right side has this list of defaults. You have a two-way point, nearest airport, your best direct airport, MSA, ground speed, GPS CDI, as well as a flight timer, aircraft position, and alerts. And like I said, those right data blocks, they do extend beyond the page, and you can scroll up and down with the touchscreen on that right side data block. Keep in mind that the COM frequencies are always going to show up in the upper left side, regardless of the configure settings of your IFD. And those are only obviously for the IFDs that are equipped with a VHF radio, your 550, 540, 440. The other three do not have a VHF. So your left data block default, again, these are your default for your left side data blocks. It's going to show 2 COM frequencies above 2 nav frequencies on the 5 series, above the decoded VLOC identifier block, above the nav mode along the left side. And again, the top strip and the right side data blocks are still customizable that way as well. Your traffic preset, this is what your traffic preset looks like. So underneath the COM blocks, you're going to see the traffic thumbnail show up there on the left side. That's going to be adjacent to your top line select key along the left side, and it's going to give you a data block slot above that traffic thumbnail to be configured however you wish. Okay, we put that there. It's really helpful because then that makes that line select key 4 usable to toggle between your above, below, and your normal traffic filter for your traffic thumbnail there. Now your transponder preset, in kind of the similar way that the traffic preset works, that line select key 4 is going to be your ident button. Of course, you can touch the screen as well, but if you tap that, it's going to bring up another keyboard where you can set your squawk code and change your different modes from the IFD itself. And that's how we would essentially control a remote transponder should we have one there as well. And then your customs, right? That permits all of your data block slots except for the 2 top left dedicated COM slots to be configured. So one of the questions that we may get is, well, let's say I've got the traffic data block preset selected. What does that mean? Well, that means you can customize everything else except for the traffic. If you want to be able to customize every single data block, just go ahead and throw it on custom as your data block preset. And essentially, like say if I had it on the traffic data block preset, that would essentially lock down that data block. I wouldn't be able to customize that one, but I could still customize every single other one. So up to you what you want to do. If you do have a remote transponder and you want to, let's say you've got you would just want to show your traffic thumbnail on the left side, you can set it for the traffic data block. Then again, you can still do that any other way. So list of options there and a whole range of options that you can do. Now, how do we get to our data block setup? Again, we select that line select key number 3. That tells us our current page that we're on. So you can see in the bigger screen here that we have the data block presets page setup, but if I want to get into my data block setup page, I'll tap that line select key to get to my data block setup, and that toggles between presets and your setup. So what do we do once we're in our data block setup page and we want to set our different data blocks? Well, there's a couple ways that we can do this. We can, while utilizing our lower right knob on our IFD, remember the big knob is going to toggle through the different data blocks in the locations, and you can roll that all the way around. It'll move up and down the right side, keep cranking, it'll go over to the top blocks and the left blocks. So that's how we highlight the data block that we want to change. Once we get to the data block that we want to change, then we'll use the little knob to move up and down our different block options. Now you can see in this page here on the screen, we do have a right data block highlighted. So you'll see the list of right block options that are available to you that you can put in that slot. So big knob changes the data block location. Little knob changes what is displayed in that data block. Now, of course, with hybrid touch and the ability to change all this through touchscreen, you can also do it this way on your touchscreen. If you simply just tap the data block that you want to change on the touchscreen and then scroll down with your finger on the different block options and tap what you want to display on there, it'll do that as well. So we can do it with knobs and buttons, or we can do that with touchscreen. Now, customizing your data blocks it goes a little bit more into it, especially with your COM and VLOC. You can program up to 4 different standby COM frequencies in the left data blocks. If you were here for, I believe it was my IFD Basics webinar, I talked about this a little bit more in depth. Of course, your frequency swap button is now going to be a toggle through all of your standby frequencies button, essentially is what that's going to do. If we just had the standard active and single standby, it would flip-flop between the two. But if we had more than those, just that active and standby, it would then toggle through our list of blocks as well. Now, a cool feature here is all those custom settings are retained when you're switching between custom presets and defaults. So if you had a custom setup, you wanted to go back to that, go ahead and hit custom, and it'll go back to the latest setting that you have set up for it. So you can still switch to your factory default. It's not going to clear it out. If you go back to custom, you don't have to set everything up again. And we just select which ones that we want to do. So let's talk a little bit about our map setup page. The map is, we use this page to kind of set the level of detail and to show and hide some of the features that we may or may not want to see. And this is incredibly customizable. So pay close attention down here, especially when I get into the map detail section, because I might spend a little bit of time in here and explain a little bit about the features of IFD and just how customizable this is. So starting right up here with the airport filter. Of course, we don't filter anything out organically from when we get information from the Jeppesen nav database. Everything is available to you based on that region that you have loaded up into the IFD. And we really want to give you the option of filtering out what you want to filter out. So in our certified box, we'll show everything that's available to us. We just won't filter it out, but you will have the chance to. So in airport filter, of course, we have runway length. And we can set that up a couple different ways, right? So the default runway length we have set up for any. What that means is if you have any showed up, it's obviously going to show any filter. If you have it set for greater than 2,000, it's going to filter out everything under 2,000 foot long runways and so on, all the way up to 5,000 feet. Towered airports, we can filter that out to give us any airport, any towered airport, or any airport with no tower. Of course, you know, the default is any on that one as well. Runway surfaces, any hard, soft, water, and hard, soft runways are represented there in the IFD. So we have the ability to filter those out as needed. But of course, if we want them all available, we'll set that to any. And then fuel. Type of fuel available is going to be any 100 low lead and Jet A available at those airports. So if it's a 100 low lead only, then it'll only show airports with 100 low lead, right? If it's only a Jet A airport, and so on. So our map general block, that's going to give us a little bit further of option to customize our display. The altitude filter, if we have that set for on or off, what that is, that's altitude that's set below, beyond which the data type is no longer displayed, right? So typically we'll leave that. I like to leave it on. I really don't like to turn that off, so I'll leave it there. The compass rose, what that is the on your map itself, you notice if you get to your map page, you'll see that big compass rose on the bird's eye view. That just turns that guy on and off there. Your heading box toggles that current heading box on and off. That's the big rectangle block with the numbers there on the map page that you're used to seeing, and that'll leave that there. So your map detail default, we'll typically see that set to factory, and that's obviously the factory defaults. If we have that set to custom, we can select the customized settings for the map detail, and we'll go into that a little bit further down. So once we start getting into customizing the map detail, that will be important. And then of course we can select that for VFR and IFR. If we're only flying VFR, we can set the map details for what's best for VFR flying. Of course, all of our VFR waypoints are represented there. IFR, we have it set for IFR to kind of filter those out, and I'll leave you just the IFR important stuff. Typically, I like leaving mine at factory. I don't really mess with the settings here too much, but it does give you that option. So the next thing I want to get into is the map setup. Now, this is what I mean by kind of getting into some greater detail here. This is how you can really customize your experience as far as the map and what you see when you not only zoom in and out of the map, but you also filter out the declutter line select key once you're in there. So the first thing I talk about is on the map detail, we're talking about the range, right? So these numbers here in this first column, what that is that's the range beyond which the data type for that line is no longer displayed. So for example here, if I'm looking at SUAs or special use airspaces, if I have this set to 160, once I zoom out beyond 160 nautical miles, then I no longer see special use airspaces. Once I zoom in to my map ranges is underneath 160 nautical miles, then my special use airspaces start to come in. Moving down to non-towered airports, right? That's set for 80. So if I zoom out beyond 80 nautical miles, I no longer see non-towered airports in my map detail. So we typically like to see these, set these a little bit higher if we want to keep all that stuff represented. And of course, we can filter that out should we decide to. All right. So the next one is turning labels on and off. All right. So once I set these, obviously pretty self-explanatory, right? We can show the labels and we can hide the labels. Keep them checked if you want to see them, uncheck them if you don't. Okay. The next one here is your altitude filter. So this one's really cool. Depending on the altitude that you're currently flying at, we can filter it out that way. So we don't have to just rely on map zoom to filter out the information that we're seeing. All right, the ability here is to be able to, once I get above, 15,000 feet, I don't really want to be having my map cluttered up with Class D airspace, whatever the case is, right? So I can filter that out depending on the altitude that I'm at. Okay, and then finally we talk about defining your declutter priorities. So basically, how important is that to you, and then at which point is that stuff going to no longer show up in your declutter line select key once you start doing that. So kind of play around with that and kind of see what works best for you. See what kind of information is important for you in either your specific flight, your different aircraft. This is customizable, highly customizable for a reason, because we have such a wide range of aircraft type that can be utilizing the IFD. So really kind of allows you to filter it out for your flying type, your aircraft type, and a couple other things. So, and of course, if you do have a 440, the page here looks exactly the same, your map setup page. You just got to scroll a little bit to find it. All the information is still there, still represented, just because of a smaller screen real estate on the 440. We've got to do some scrolling, but if you do have a 440, you just go ahead and scroll down and all that stuff is there. Okay, so getting into your FMS setup. You get into your FMS setup page again, that line select key on the left side there, we'll toggle that, our map setup, we'll push that one time to get it into our FMS setup. Okay, and we're going to change some of that calculation criteria. So this is a really, really cool feature, and a couple different ways that we can kind of tailor our experience here. Right, so the first block here is vertical profile. So what that is, first we start with our preferred descent rate. So this is kind of a one-time thing. You don't really, you can, but I tend to leave this descent rate at a given rate for anything. Now the default is 500 feet per minute. Obviously, you can edit there, and that's how we compute our top of descent marker. So depending on our rate that we have, that's how that's going to change that. Our transition altitude is going to give us a cast message of when it's set to, or when to set your altimeter to 2992 or Q&E en route in your climb. Now the default is 18,000 feet. Should we have a need to change that, we can, but once you change that, you set your transition altitude. Once the IFD realizes that you're, once you're at that, it'll tell you, okay, switch back to 2992 or switch back to local. Your transition level gives you a cast message of when to switch back to that local baro. And of course, the default is flight level 180. Okay, so your alerts, that's just turning on and off the different cast messages and the different alerts that that you can get in the IFD. Now, if we want to chime for controlled airspace, TFRs, special use airspaces, or your transition altitude, we can turn those on and off. So it depends on whether or not you want to get those cast messages as you're approaching a TFR or as you're approaching controlled airspace. This is where we'll control that, is going to be in your FMS setup under the alerts. Now, procedures. This is what's going to filter out some of those procedures when we hit the procedure button. Maybe we're not interested in high altitude airways, so we can turn those on and off, right? Low altitude airways on and off. Arrivals, departures, approaches, and different patterns, we can turn those off as well. So we have had a couple of calls in tech support saying, hey, you know, I can't find my, I was looking for a jet route, I couldn't find it. Well, come to find out, he had his one of his procedures that were turned off, high altitude airways, and a couple other ones. Hey, I can't find, all the approaches are gone. Well, it's in here. It's where you're going to be. So the default is on, all on for all of those, and typically don't mess with those too much, but we do have the ability to filter those out should we decide to. Now your display, if we want to show WASP channel numbers, we can do that in the display block in FMS setup. We'll just go ahead and turn that on, and we're going to get the WASP channel number to the right side of the approach once we get into the list, the drop-down list to select our approach for any given airport. Now, mini flight plan format. This is an example of what your mini flight plan format looks like. It basically takes all those waypoints and thins them out into a strip on your flight plan. It's really helpful if you have a really long flight plan and you just want to see kind of a more narrowed down version. You want to see more of those on your page, then we'll go ahead and turn that mini flight plan format on. Okay, so user options. Okay, I want to get into user options, and keep in mind that on your IFD, you can customize up to 5 different users, and you can change the name. You can have it set for whatever you want, but you have the ability for up to 5 of them with the current software version. So with zoom mode, what this means is that's going to bring up a bigger font. The drawback to that, obviously, if we have a bigger font, there's less that we can put on the page. So as the letters and everything and the numbers get bigger, maybe it's a little more scrolling on the data block on the right side, but everything gets blown up, right? Your data blocks, your tabs, and even your line select key labels, you'll see those in bigger. So we have had some calls and times, hey, I don't know what happened. Like all the numbers are huge and I can't figure out how to turn it back. Well, it's simple. It's just zoom mode on your user options. So of course, how to get there is we're in the aux page, we're in the setup tab, and then the user options line select key on the left. And of course, we know that we're on that because the cyan block around that is visible. So we know that we are in user options. Touchscreen, simple, self-explanatory, right? We can turn on our touchscreen or we can turn it off. Keep in mind that if you do turn off your touchscreen and you want to turn your touchscreen back on, you cannot touch the screen to turn your screen back on, right? We're just going to have to use the knobs and buttons that way. So I guess that's how we know that it's working. But we do have the ability to turn off the touchscreen should we decide to. Bezel and backlight controls. So we got a couple of different options for this as well. If we have it set for user control, we're going to use that right knob to adjust. Now, first we'll select bezel mode. If we have that selected to user control, then we'll see this slider here. And then we can use our knob to go down here, touch the screen, and then slide that left and right to adjust both the bezel brightness and the screen display. So bezel is going to control the backlighting on your buttons, and then the display mode is going to be for your screen itself. If we have either one of those set to auto, it's going to go based off of the photo cell. Now your photo cell, if you look at your IFD, is actually going to be immediately underneath your CDI knob in all of the IFDs. If we want to test that, let's go ahead and get in a hanger and turn on the IFD and put your finger over that photo cell. So if you have this set to auto, either one of these, put your finger over the photo cell and then watch what happens. It'll start to get darker and darker. And then dim bus. If we have either one of these set to dim bus, then that means that our bezel and or our display brightness is going to be completely controlled by that dimmer rheostat that we have wired into the IFD. Chart day and night mode, we can set that up for day, we can set it up for night, or we have it set up to auto. So based on the current brightness settings of the IFD, if we have it set to auto, it can automatically invert the colors of your Jeppesen charts and give you basically a night mode for all of your charts. Now we can have that set up for the sensor or based off the dim bus as well. Switch tanks alert, that's going to give you a cast message, and you see that here on the bottom of the screen. It's going to say switch tanks. It's a recurring cast message, so once you acknowledge it, it'll recycle, and then we can have that set up for either never, and then in 15-minute intervals all the way up to 60 minutes. And that's going to give you a little cast message and a reminder, okay, hey, switch the tanks. This is going to start counting down as soon as you boot up the IFD. All right, so it doesn't know, it doesn't really differentiate whether or not your engine is on or not. So just keep that in mind that once you turn on the IFD, if you have your switch tanks alert set for a different number a certain time, that's when that time starts. So if it takes you 15 minutes to go from avionics master on to crank when you should start, just keep that in mind that it's going to start as soon as the IFD starts. Time format, we have a couple different options for that. We can set it up for 12-hour, 24-hour, or just showing straight UTC time. Obviously UTC, that's going to give you the current UTC for reference based on your GPS. That's where the IFD gets its UTC time from. Local time offset, that's going to be for whatever time zone that you're in. And that's going to be able to change in 15-minute increments. So based off your UTC time, the local time offset, whether it's -4, -5, 5.5, whatever the case is, that's how you're going to set that local time offset. And that is a plus or minus based off of UTC. So whatever your local time is, if it's plus or minus, that's how we would set that. Local time, and then we can, it's going to display the current time for reference. Now you can't edit this. You can see it's grayed out. How we change the local time on our user options, obviously, is just done by the local time offset. And as we change that local time offset, we'll see the local time change along with it. Keyboard convenience, if you see this, if you have a single IFD and it's grayed out, that's because you don't have a number 2 IFD in your plane. This is going to be available if you do have a second IFD, and we have everything set up through cross sync and everything. So what is keyboard convenience? If you have that set to on, if you have it set to on for both IFDs, if you need to punch anything in on a keyboard, if you tap the screen on the top IFD, your keyboard's going to pop up on the bottom IFD, and vice versa, right? If you're needing to enter something on your number 2 IFD, the keyboard's going to show up on the number 1. So it's going to pull up that QWERTY keyboard on the other IFD if you have keyboard convenience set to on. Bluetooth and networking. So Bluetooth on off, that's going to enable use of the Bluetooth keyboard that came with your IFD. And then networking has got a couple of different options. The main ones that we're going to use are going to be off, LEO Wi-Fi, and then whatever remote that you have set up. We don't use local wired and we don't use remote wired. Depending on how we have it set up in the networking selection in maintenance mode, if we've added another remote Wi-Fi receiver like a Stratus 3 level bomb or something like that, a Stratix, then that will show up there. That'll be another selection that then becomes available if we have that set up. So your default is LEO Wi-Fi, and of course the default SSID for LEO Wi-Fi, the host Wi-Fi source inside the IFD, that's completely customizable. We can go into user options and change that if we decide to. But that's how we're going to use IFD 100. That's how we're going to use ForeFlight, FlyQ, and all those other third-party apps that we interface with. And once we do that, we're going to get some indications on the top right screen of the IFD to show us when the Bluetooth and the Wi-Fi are active. Once everything's up and running, those icons are going to turn green on the top right of the IFD screen. All right, and of course, we can add up to 3 more networks in maintenance mode for use with the third-party devices that we normally do. So how we can get to that, of course, big knob, little knob, touchscreen, we can change those all in user options. Aircraft flight ID. That's going to give you a way to enter in the flight ID and the default VFR code for your remote mode S transponders. Okay, if you have if your system's configured for that to talk to a remote transponder, then that's going to become available. But that's what the aircraft flight ID is for. So if you do have a remote transponder, obviously it's pretty important to keep that matching, right? We want it to be correct. Horizon heading marks. This is what the horizon heading mark is. So if we turn that on and off on the 5 series IFDs or the 550, I should say 545 as well. If we have that set to on, then our horizon heading marks, as you see here, are going to be visible. And obviously, if you turn it off, then you won't see the cardinal directions on the horizon in the SVS page. ADI HDI display, that's going to be your horizontal deviation indicator. So we can set that to auto or set that to always on. If we have it set to always on, it's going to be based off of your magenta line and where you are in relation to your active flight plan. If we have that set to auto, then it'll come up for the different approaches and things that we would see in ADI for. Map orientation. So here's one that we get a lot of questions about. How do I set this? What does this mean? There's 2 settings here for map orientation. We can either set that for heading up or we can set it for track up. The key difference here is whether or not we have a heading source coming into the IFD, whether that be a magnetometer or any of those. What does this mean for me when I'm in the map page? Well, if I have it set for track up, remember in a previous webinar, I'd explained that if you're in the map page and you push the lower right knob, it's going to toggle you through 3 different map modes. We're going to get north up, and we're going to get heading up in a 360 and then a heading up with a 270 arc view. That is what that means is we set this for heading up or track up. That's going to be the difference between the 2, right? So heading up is going to be the default here in this case, but if you don't have a heading source coming into the IFD, then the default is going to revert to a track up orientation. So that's going to be that other setting in your map page as I'm toggling through that lower right knob and I'm pushing those in and I see my different orientation settings. You don't really change it here as much as you would change it in the map mode. So I hope that kind of clears up a little bit of that confusion. I guess the best way that I could really narrow that down and simplify that is set it to heading up if you have a heading source. We can leave it at that. But if you don't, it's going to revert to track up. So not really too much we have to worry about here, but just keep that in mind. If you do have a heading source, you do have the ability to change that between heading up and track up. Comm frequency spacing for our international friends and our international customers, we can switch that between 25 and 8.3 kilohertz to accommodate the comms in other places. So last week's webinar, I did talk about this, about advisory glide slope, auto VLOC tuning. We talked a little bit more in depth about GPS and velo capture. I'm not going to get too in depth into this, but I do want to touch on advisory glide slope a little bit. If you have that set to on, it's going to transmit a glide slope deviation signal that's going to show up on external indicators, HSI and EFIS, for any approaches that don't have a published glide slope associated with them. Advisory glide slope is going to be displayed for RNAV approaches, GPS approaches, and any approaches that are authorized for a GPS overlay, regardless of SBAS. Now, in a non-SBAS environment, if one of those approaches are selected and it has a published flight path angle in the database, then you would expect an LNAV plus V approach. And then if you have that set to off, it's not going to transmit a glide slope deviation. It's just not going to do it. So on or off, on does a lot of really cool things, off doesn't do nothing. And then let me go back one. Let's go back here. We talked about all those. Auto VLOC tuning, right? That's going to tune your VLOC automatically. Leave it on. Just go ahead and put it on and leave it on, and you'll see the benefits of that. GPS VLOC capture, either auto or manual, based on the capture criteria that I talked about in the IFD Advanced webinar. That information is also available in the pilot guide as well. I won't go into it in this webinar, but if you missed it, check the last webinar or just look in the pilot guide as well. I believe that's chapter 6 off the top of my head. And then auto enable mist, what's that going to do? It's going to automatically activate your mist approach procedure in your flight plan when the aircraft crosses the mist approach point. FLTA, we can either turn it on or off. What is FLTA? What does it look like? That's that forward-looking terrain alerting. So when you're in your SVS page on any one of the IFDs, we're looking at that exocentric kind of up and back view, and we get close to terrain. This is what's going to warn you of 30 and 45 seconds of CFIT, and it's going to be that long strip out in front of your plane. We can turn that on or off, and that's forward-looking terrain alerting. So if we have it on, it's going to enable forward-looking terrain alerting and the premature descent alert functions, that red and yellow kind of flashlight beam that we see there on the page. Different from terrain awareness, which we can also turn on and off. And that's going to either enable or disable the red and yellow that kind of shows up everywhere around us on our map. The terrain caution oral alert, we can select that between caution terrain and terrain ahead. The default is caution terrain. And then of course the terrain warning oral is going to be terrain pull up or terrain. So you can even customize the type of message that you want the IFD to chirp at you when you're getting too low. So FLTA exclusion areas, we can also toggle those on and off. And that's going to enable and disable the hatched white clear zone area around those airports, especially those airports where they're not going to provide you an alert. So that's a way to cut off some of the terrain alerts as we're coming up on an airport that may or may not have FLTA exclusion areas set up in that. So again, all that stuff is in the pilot guide as well. If you have any questions about that, we can definitely get into a little more detail on that there. Top of descent oral, if we turn that on and off, that's going to enable your top of descent chime. It's basically, it's going to give you a little chime and a cast message is going to come up for your top of descent. All this does is it turns on and off the chime associated with that cast message if you're reaching your top of descent. Airspace oral alerts, again, that's chime. That's going to give you an alert of any impending airspace along with that cast message, and we can turn it on or off as well. And then our 500-foot callouts, turning that on and off. That's going to enable your 500-foot AGL call out as you're coming in through 500 feet on the GPS altitude. That's how we'll disable that. Bearing reference, our units preferences down here gives us a couple of different ways that we can set the different parameters as far as bearing reference, altitude, speed, distance, pressure units, things like that. Bearing reference is going to be set up between either magnetic and true. That's going to set your orientation and all of your data blocks for either magnetic or true bearing. When it's set for true, the map's going to display true north, and then of course, it's going to display true north when you're in north up mode. So remember those three different map settings that I was talking about, either your north up, track up, whatever. If we're set up and we have it set for true north, it's going to give you it's going to display true north when you're in north up mode. Distance, speed, nautical miles, kilometers, and miles per hour. Altitude, vertical speed units, feet per minute, meters per minute, and meters per second. Pressure units, inches of mercury, millibars, or hectopascals. Temperature units, Fahrenheit, Celsius. Fuel units, gallons, imperial gallons, liters, pounds, and kilograms. And then position units is going to be, as you see below, UTM, and then MGRS, the military grid reference system. We can set those up for that way as well. Hide page tabs, we can set that up in either never or 2, 5, 10, or 15 seconds. And what that does is that takes those tabs and they'll just sink down below for that given number of seconds after they were last used. Give you a little bit more view of your page there if you want to do that. If you want to bring those back up, just tap on the screen. It'll bring those tabs back up. And then, of course, with IFD 100, those setup options work exactly the same as the IFD. So you can further customize IFD 100 to maybe you want the same information, maybe you want a completely different data set when you're running IFD 100. The methods of setting up IFD 100 is essentially the exact same way. Obviously, no knobs on your iPad, so it's going to be touchscreen only for IFD 100, but we have the ability to set up those data blocks in the exact same way that we did on our IFD. So moving right along to info and utilities, okay? This is kind of the time where I do want to show a couple things based off of some examples. So if you don't have your iPads, don't worry. I'll have my simulator up here shortly. If you do have your iPads available, go ahead and load and activate this flight plan. If you were with me last week, this looks really familiar. This is basically our, if I remember, this is our 2-OSH flight plan. So if you've got Ifd Trainer and you still have that, you can go ahead and load that flight plan and activate it. And if not, this is going to be that flight plan. So we're going to take off from St. Paul downtown. We're going to hit up the EAU VOR. We're going to go Maxima, Wilches, Ripon, and Kosh. And what I want to show you here is how to use the info tab and the utilities tab for a bunch of different things. How to go a little bit deeper into that info tab and finding all the information that we can pull out of that. How to find comm frequencies, how to search for airports. And then in the utility tab, we're going to get into the different timers, calculators, and checklists, what they are and what they do. So Brian and Will, this is probably going to be a good time to answer some questions before I move on to this. Is there anything that we haven't answered and we want to address here? Looking through the chat, looks like you guys have done an amazing job answering questions.
Yeah, sure. What's the difference between audio 1 and audio 2 outputs? Which one do all the alerts come through?
So audio alerts are going to be, that's going to be an unswitched thing. So the RO alerts, that's going to be a completely different output. Audio 1 and 2 is going to be, let's see, I think I want to say that's the active and standby. Without looking at the diagram, I know we have a separate output for those alerts. So especially our terrain is going to be a TAWS output off of a completely different connector than the other ones.
Perfect. From Linda, I have the IFD 440. When towers are yellow, they are huge and take up a lot of space on the display. Can they be made smaller?
No, they can't. No, they cannot be made smaller. Now, I want to say with the different zoom levels, maybe, but there's really not a way to kind of organically go in and make the icons smaller. I want to say that you should be able to shrink those. I think just with the different map zoom levels. I want to say.
Yep. What is the purpose in the audio setting standby comm SQ on or off? Is the purpose of the side tone selection to raise lower volume when SQ is off?
So these are digital radios, and there isn't a toggleable squelch, right? That with digital radio, squelch either is or it isn't. Okay, so we turn the squelch on, and it's kind of an automatic squelch, and then if we have it off, then it's gonna give you that kind of hissy feedback that you get if if you were to turn that all the way down. Essentially, what that is.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things that I didn't go over in the webinar is a lot of the audio settings, but here's what I can do. I can definitely touch on that here briefly, because as I was building this webinar, I did notice that I didn't touch on that, but we can definitely do that. So if everybody can see my screen right here, this is the audio page. I'm in the volume control. I'm in the aux page. I'm in the audio tab, and then I'm at my volume control. I do see a question here. How do I turn down the oral alerts? That's going to be here in the audio tab, and we can adjust that oral alert. We can use our smaller knob to roll that up and down. Okay, active vlog, same thing. If we want to tune, identify, listen for the Morse code, that's how we turn up and down that volume that comes in from the radio, from the IFD. And then side tone, obviously that's going to be the your own voice in your headset. We can turn that up and down as well. So that's how we would change that.
And one thing that's come up quite a bit, sorry for any confusion, the IFD Trainer app that's currently available on the App Store is 10.3. Mike is reviewing the current software version that should be on your units, which is 10.2.6. So if you're trying to follow along on the trainer, there might be some inconsistencies. Again, once 10.3 is released and live, we'll do the similar webinar specifically for 10.3. Again, sorry for the confusion.
You're not going to see it in what I'm showing today. You're not going to see a difference really in what I'm my examples here between 10.2.6 and 10.3. Keep in mind too that the biggest change in 10.3, now this is a 10.3 simulator here, but what you're going to see is going to be user options, and that's why when I was going and talking about user options, I stuck with screenshots, because my emulators are all running 10.3. All right, so we didn't touch that in a live view for that very reason. So that's really, I mean, the biggest kind of in your face change between 10.2.6 and 10.3. So let's see, how else? How are we looking? We can go ahead and move on to info and utilities if we're good to go there.
Yeah, that works. We got a few more questions, but we can save them to the end.
Okay, cool. All right, so if everybody's following along with IFD Trainer at home and they've loaded up this flight plan, we're going to go ahead and move along. Okay, so getting airport information. So let's say that I've loaded my flight plan, I've activated it. What we're going to do here, go ahead and tap the info tab on the bottom of your screen, and what you're going to see is information for St. Paul downtown. Now, provided that we haven't moved, 5 miles off already. I know we kind of talked a little bit, but either we had just activated our flight plan or we're still on the ground. We should be seeing St. Paul downtown. If we don't, I'll explain why here later if you've activated your flight plan. But here's what we're going to see, right? We're going to see a number of different blocks for general elevation, comm frequencies, runways, nav aids, departures, arrivals, approaches, and weather. Now, how to expand those? A couple different ways, right? We can either tap on that block to expand it with the touchscreen, or if we're not using the touchscreen, we're going to use the right knob to highlight, and to select it, we're going to push that knob to expand those different blocks on our info tab. Now, what that's going to look like say we expanded up our general block, what we're going to see is all of our basic information about the airport, about St. Paul downtown. We can see it's a public towered airport. We have the lat long, the elevation, magnetic variation, even some cool features: sunrise, sunset, density, altitude, the fuel type in this block as well. What's really cool about this particular block here is we do have a density altitude calculator. Now, this is going to take information from the METAR if the IFD is getting it, if you're getting that information from ADSB. If not, we can always plug those in from the METAR. So we can edit those blocks and do whatever we want to get that density altitude that we're looking for as well. So usually in most cases, if we're getting METAR information, that stuff is automatic in our density altitude calculator. So if you want to see the density altitude, that way we can look at it on that page. So moving down to the runways, if we expand the runways block in the info tab, and for this example, St. Paul downtown has 3 different runways: 927, 1331, and 1432. right off the bat, before ever expanding them, we get the runway length and the runway width. Now, if we take our cyan block and we hover over this this blue circle with the caret in there, we can expand that even further to tell us what type of runway it is. We see here that it's an asphalt runway. We see the exact locations of the runway thresholds, as well as bearing and elevation for either side of that runway. And we'll be able to see that information for all three of our runways at that airport, and then any other airport that has, you know, one or more runways as well. So what about your destination? I want everybody to do this. So go back to your flight plan tab and take your cursor and move it over KOSH, over Oshkosh. We can do that one of two ways. We can do that by either tapping on the screen over Osh, or we'll use the knob and buttons to do that. Once we have the cursor over Osh, hit your info tab and notice what happens to the line select key on the left side. It's going to now tell you that you can paste KOSH. If we paste KOSH, what's going to happen is it's now going to paste Oshkosh into the very top. So St. Paul downtown is going to go away, and now you're going to see the information for your destination. And this is a quick way to do it. The other method of doing that, instead of going back to the flight plan, highlighting, hitting info tab, is just changing KSTP on the very top to KOSH. Tap it, bring up your keyboard, punch in KOSH, hit enter, and then all the information for Oshkosh is going to show up there as well. So once we're in there and we have Whitman Regional pulled up, we can go look at our different information on the info tab that we can do. Again, we want to look at the different communications. We can, just like I mentioned before, we can tap on the block to expand it, or we're going to use that right knob to highlight and then select to expand our communications block. I want to show you the different things that we can look for in there. So we bring up the communications block. So every available frequency for that airport is going to be represented here. And all this information comes from the nav database. So if I want to load up the ATIS, and if I don't know what that is, I can use this as yet another tool in the IFD to find that and then tune it. So if I want to load this up into my standby so that I can flip it over and then listen to it or monitor it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to either double tap the frequency, or I'll highlight it and push the enter button, or I'll use the knob to highlight that frequency and then push the knob in to load it into my standby. So you got three different ways to load that up into your standby frequency. This is how it would look on the 440 as well, but this is the frequency nomination page. So again, I mentioned frequency nomination last week. It was another one of those things that I talked about. So again, on frequency nomination with the 5 series, you have a dedicated frequency button on the right side of your IFD bezel. If you have a 4 series, we don't have a frequency button, but we get to the frequency nomination tab by turning our right side comm knob, and that's going to bring up our frequency knob. So the thing about that though with the 4 series is to get to your different tabs, since we don't have a frequency button, we're just going to have to tap on the screen to get to our airport, en route, and our recent tabs in frequency nomination. If we have a 5 series, if we just keep toggling that frequency button, we can do the exact same thing. So the 3 frequency tabs, if you're not aware about what those are, if we're in the airport tab, that's going to be all of the most logical frequencies that are associated with an airport. So if you bring up the frequency nomination before takeoff or up to 5 miles after departure, it's going to show all the frequencies associated with your origin. However, if you're 5 miles or more from your origin, it's going to display all the frequencies for your destination. So en route tab, that's going to be the most likely nearby ATC and flight service frequencies for your current position. And then the recent tab is going to be the 10 most recent, or the up to 10 most frequent recent frequencies that you've entered. Incredibly useful for going back to a previous frequency. To load any of those into the standby, you would do the exact same as you did on the info tab, and either double tap the frequency or highlight and hit enter. So finding frequencies, a couple different ways that we can do that. if we go to any one of our waypoints in our flight plan, put the cursor over it, hit the info tab, that's going to allow the ability to paste that waypoint with line select key number 3 in the info tab. Again, now we can always change that on the very top, like you see on the top right of my screen here where it says KOSH, KOSH. I can tap on that and change it to EAU, but if I did it this way, if I put the cursor and then went to the info tab, I can then paste EAU and it would essentially bring up all that information available for that particular waypoint. So it doesn't just have to be airports. It can be essentially any nav station available. So how we do that, this is how the Eau Claire VORTAC would look had I done that, if I pasted it, if I added Eau Claire into the block up top. If I wanted to load up that frequency into my standby nav, all I would do is double tap the frequency, or I would put my cursor over it and then hit enter. And then you'll notice that 113.65 gets loaded up into my standby nav. I hit the flip-flop button, and then that now brings that VORTAC frequency active into my active nav. Now we talk about searching for airports and facilities. You notice here on your IFD on the bottom left, you're going to see the search line select key. We're going to get into that. So if you are following along, and if you do see that, go ahead and tap on that search line select key. And what you're going to see here is a search for airports and facilities. You should see this block pull up. What I want you to do is, if you're following along with me, go ahead and punch in Chicago, tap on that city block and bring up your on-screen keyboard, just type in Chicago. And then we get to the kind block that's going to give us a couple of different options. We're going to go ahead and select airport. What this does is allows me, if I don't know the name of an airport, I can search by city, I can search by state, I can search by facility type to bring up that information in my info tab. So if I don't know the identifier for Chicago O'Hare, but I know I want to go there, I can search for it. I know it's an airport in Chicago. This is going to be my list of airports in the Chicago area. And then all I then have to do is highlight and select Chicago O'Hare. And then there's Chicago O'Hare comes up into my info page right there. So really useful if you don't know, again, if you don't know the identifier of an airport, but you know city and state, incredibly useful there. Here's a quick little bonus for you. If you do have a 5 series IFD, any one of these that has this little book looking icon on the airport block in your flight plan, that is your charts. So if you got small enough fingers where you can tap on that screen or use the knob to highlight over it and then select it, it's going to then take you right to your charts tab, where you can view any of the available charts for that airport that you have selected. So look for that if you're in your flight plan tab, or if you're in the info tab. If there's charts available, you'll see that icon. You'll see it in the same area, whether it's in your flight plan tab, or if you're on the info tab, you'll see this little icon here, and that's what it will bring you to. So quick way to get to your charts if you're looking for them that way. Okay, so fun part, timers. So we got a couple of different timers, and how we're going to get to that is going to be on the utilities page. Brian, are you unmuted? Anyways, so timers, right? So we got a couple of different timers. We got generic, which is a count up or a countdown timer. If we have it set for count up, obviously, as soon as we hit start, it's going to start counting up. If we have that selected for count down, I know it's selected because the button is in blue. I can count down from any configurable time, hours, minutes, and seconds that I want to. If I have the trip timer, either a from power on or from takeoff start, it's going to automatically start from either power on or from takeoff, whichever one that I have selected. Obviously, from power on, when you power on the IFD, that's when your timer starts. And then if I have from takeoff, it's going to be triggered by a ground speed of above 35 knots. The kind of the pseudo weight on wheels is the same signal that sends to the transponder to say go into out mode. That's when it's going to trigger your trip timer. And then once you land and you're no longer flying, you're under that 35 knots ground speed, that timer will stop if you have it set to from takeoff. Event timer. So that event timer, that's going to log your power on or takeoff time. That's going to be based on local or Zulu time, depending on whatever time format that you have set up in user options. Now, custom timers, it allows you up to 10 different ones. You can really do a lot with those. Most frequently, we see those used for inspections, for IFR recertifications, for BFRs, or any one of those combinations that you want to do. So how we get custom timers set up, if we're in the timers page and we scroll down to the very bottom, or if we tap on the screen, we basically want that cyan cursor out there and available. So we would either, in this case, we would either tap the screen again or press the enter button, and that's going to bring up a custom timer where we can customize the name. We can customize whether it's an event, one time, periodic. We'll use it as an event timer to track due dates, and once that event time that we have set passes, we'll get an overdue message. We'll get a CAS message associated with that. Once we have if we have it set for a one time, we can set the flight time to a specific event. And then periodic is going to be the recurring one. That's going to be the one that we use periodic for our oil changes or our 100 hours or whatever that we decide for our custom timer. If everybody's good on timers, I'm going to move over to calculators. There's a couple of things in here. Have you guys seen any timer questions in the chat that I can that we can address real quick before we move on? Let's see.
No, I know we did have one about the sorry, I'm looking for it. Sorry, I can't find it. If
okay.
Somebody did have a question.
Okay, that's fine.
I could just repeat that.
No worries, Brian. I can move on to calculators.
All right.
Okay, so how we use the calculator is you have a couple of blocks here that we can change, and those are going to be everything here that is outlined in gray or at least in a gray background. We can plug those in. We'll change those values to get all of these other values. So, for example, for our trip planner, our desired track, distance, ETE, sunrise and sunset is all going to be based off of the information that either we enter or is entered for us in these upper blocks here. Same thing with the air data calculator. We can enter any of these numbers to get true airspeed, winds aloft, density, altitude, and our headwind. Any numbers that are in green are going to be from external sources, whether that be a PFD, an air data calculator, whether that be flight plan information from our flight plan in the IFD. Anything that is from an external, what I would call an external source, is going to be in green here. Also a pretty useful troubleshooting tool, right? My IFD is telling me to automatically sequence after my mist, and I say, okay, do you have a baro corrected altitude source? Well, how do I know? Go to your air data calculator page and see if that baro corrected altitude number is in green, because that tells you that it's coming from an external source. It means you're getting baro corrected altitude. So cool little feature, but just know that we can use this calculator to plan our trip, as well as get some different air data calculations in the calculator page as well.
Hey, Mike.
Yes.
Hey, so Joe reminded me of what the question was. So on the fuel timer, I believe the switch tanks alert.
Yes.
So if you have it at 30 minutes, let's say you're flying for 15 minutes and then you land power off your unit. When you power it back on, will it continue the time from the 15-minute mark, or does it start back over at 30 minutes?
No, it resets. It resets the power off.
Yeah, that's what we thought. And then can we have tech make room for more event timers? So that's just feedback we'll take to engineers.
Well, I think we would we can set up custom timers that way. For more, if we were looking for more than 10, is that what we're looking for?
I'm not sure. Case, if you can clarify.
Yeah, right now it's just it's only giving you
more than 10.
More than 10. Okay, yeah, can't do that currently, but we can definitely kick that out to the engineers and see what they can do. Okay, so kind of the big ticket item for today is going to be checklists. We get a lot of questions about checklists. A lot of guys wondering how to get these set up. I find them incredibly useful. However, I'm still a paper checklist guy, but I do love the ability for checklists in my IFD. Currently, we do have to enter these kind of one by one. We will have the ability later to load them up with a CSV file, but for right now, we're punching these in manually, each checklist and then each checklist item of that checklist. But I'll show you how quick and easy it is. So let's try that. If you are following along with Trainer, go ahead and go to the Utilities tab and then tap on that checklist line select key on the bottom left to bring up your checklist. So you probably have nothing there right now, but we're going to show you how we can change this around. This is the one that I have the live demo for, so I'm actually going to do a live demo of adding a checklist. So I show you guys just how easy that this is. How we're going to do this is first we have to add a number of different checklists, right? So if I want to add my before start, before taxi, my takeoff checklist, I'm going to do that here on this main page. Once I get all those added, then I can go over and edit each individual checklist. I'll show you how to do that. So we're in our checklist tab. What we're going to do is we're going to hit the edit button, and we want that guy to be in blue. We want our edit block to be in blue. You'll see a blank space show up. We'll tap on the screen. We'll change the name of our checklist, and then once we're done editing, we'll go ahead and tap the edit button one more time. Okay, once we do that, and we notice that the edit bar is in blue on the left, to edit the individual checklist, we're going to make sure that the edit bar is gray, and we're going to tap on it. And then to change the individual checklist, we're going to tap on it, and we're going to either we're going to hit enter to start making changes to that. If I've lost anybody, I'm going to do a live demo. So we go we highlight that item, we hit enter. It's going to bring us to the checklist itself that we can then edit. Again, we're going to tap edit to make it blue, and then we're going to see that block come up, and then we can start plugging away at our different items here. So we want to make it blue. Once we're done, we make the changes, we tap it again, we hit edit, and then we will actually start to see these. You see where it says not completed and clear to delete. We're going to see those change values, and then we can go back to the back menu. So, and then the cool thing about this is once we have our checklist added, then we start using our checklist. Now we're just tapping on each individual one, and it'll all highlight in green. You'll see a check next to it. So it's a really cool way to kind of keep track of everything that you've done so far. And using these checklists in your IFD is actually pretty easy. So one of the things that I do want to do is I want to build a checklist with you all. And we're going to make a really simple one. We're going to do a before takeoff checklist with just a couple of items. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this guy in here, and we're going to go utilities, checklist. So we're already here in checklist, and it's already in blue. So this is the main page. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to tap on the screen to bring up my on-screen keyboard, and I want a before takeoff checklist. So I'm going to go before space takeoff, TAKEOFF, and I hit enter. Okay. So now I have created my checklist. Now I can create a second one if I want to, but if I want to edit this checklist, I go ahead and deselect the edit block. I make it gray. I'll go ahead and highlight this guy, and then I'll hit enter. So now this takes me to now I'm in my before takeoff checklist, and I can start editing this. If I hit the edit block, again, make it blue, bring this up, and I can tap on here. My first item is going to be doors locked. Doors, and I like doing dots, locked. I hit enter. Okay, so now it brings up another block. I'll tap on the block, and I'll say brakes on. Brakes, ... on. I'll add a third one. We'll go controls free and correct. Controls, ... free, space, and space. Correct. Okay, and let's say I'm done. I won't do instruments. I'll go ahead and tap on that edit block again, make it gray. And you notice how it says clear forward directory. If I hit clear, Now it takes me back to all the checklists that I have created. Okay, so another thing I want to do is using the checklist. So now once I've done that, and let's say I've created my flight plan already here, I've activated it. All right, I'm sitting on the ground and I want to go do my before takeoff checklist. I'll come out to my main checklist page. I'll go ahead and tap on it. And now, okay, doors are locked. I've locked my doors. I tap on the screen and now it turns green. There's a check mark next to it. Next thing that comes up is brakes on. Okay, yeah, brakes, they're good. Okay, controls free, correct. Okay, those are good there. Now, once I have all those items highlighted or checked off in my before takeoff checklist, I'll now see complete. And if I go clear, that'll take me back to my directory. And you'll notice that my before takeoff checklist, because I've completed it, now my before takeoff checklist is now in fact complete. So that's how to use checklists. Couple different resources for you guys. We do have the Flying with the Avidyne IFD book written by the late Michael Bauer. It is scenario-based training. A lot of what we went over today is actually in that Bauer book in chapters, I want to say 10 and 11. It is scenario-based training. Follows mainly the 550, 540, and 440. It's a real helpful way to follow along with the IFD Trainer app. That book is available on the Avidyne store at Amazon.com. But of course, as you guys know, as Avidyne owners, you do get a free copy of this book. If you don't have your copy of the Bauer book, please reach out to us at pilotsupport@avidyne.com. I want your tail number and I want your address in that email block to say, hey, this is my tail number, this is where I live. I would love a copy of the Bauer book, and we'll respond back with your tracking number for your book. A couple of resources here is our online training. We've got a bunch of companion videos for the Bauer book, a couple of lessons that we have there on our website. If you go to Avidyne Training, you're going to see those, and they do coincide with the Bauer book. You get to that by going to avidyne.com. On the support tab up top, click on Avidyne Training, and then select training videos, and you'll see all those there. So between that and your Bauer book, it makes for a very useful training tool for getting the most out of your IFD. This and other webinars that we've had in the past are available for on our website at Avidyne Webinars On Demand. So if you go to avidyne.com/training, you're going to see this page. Click on demand replay, and then you will see the past webinars as well. We do have a lot of our webinars that we've done in the past available on our YouTube channel as well. So that is another resource. But check us out, avidyne.com/training, where you can get to your on-demand replay. We do have a customer knowledge base, so any questions that you may have, we do have a lot of different resources for getting some of these answers. Tech support is an incredible tool as well, but chances are any issue that you come across or question that you may have, it's probably already been covered, and there's probably a knowledge base already associated with that. So this will allow you to go to avidyne.com to our knowledge base. There, it is a searchable. It's a search engine. Plug in some keywords and see what pops up. We do have some top articles that are ever changing based off of how many people click on them and just the most popular viewed articles that are available there in our top articles. But it's a great resource for all of you guys getting your warranty info, how to activate your database, your 60-day trial, and a couple of different things. So definitely utilize your knowledge base there on our website. And again, our friend Gary Reeves, he is a master CFI. He wrote a book, Single Pilot IFR Pro Tips. It is an amazing, amazing book. I highly recommend you guys pick up a copy of this book. Gary is our national training partner. He's a true master of the IFD, and he has a couple of different training courses out there for you, whether it be any of his online courses or his in-person courses. He will fly out to you. He will train you in your own plane for 3 days and just turn you into an absolute master of your IFD in your own aircraft. We do have the IFD Trainer. I did make mention of that previously. If you haven't downloaded IFD Trainer, it is free on the App Store. Go ahead and give it a download. It's based off of certified flight code, and it can emulate any one of these 6 IFDs that we do have out there available to you. So if you have a 440, go ahead and set it up for an IFD 440. You can train just as you would before you get out to the aircraft, and we certainly recommend that you download that free IFD Trainer. Social media, we're very active on social media, very active on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. I'm one of the moderators of the Avidyne Pilots Club. We're very active. We're there on a daily basis, and we love interacting with you guys out there on our Avidyne Pilots Club Facebook page. So if you're on Facebook, go ahead and join that up, and we'll see you over there. Next week's webinar, we're going to be talking about the GNS 430 to IFD 440 upgrade. So if you've got some friends that are kind of on the fence about upgrading, maybe they do have a GNS 430, let's talk. Let's get them over to this webinar. Would love to have them over. We can talk about all the benefits of upgrading and a couple comparisons between the IFD 4 series and the GTN 650 XI that we can demonstrate as well. So happy to see you guys out there at next week's webinar. If you guys are registered, you'll get a email for that here in the next few days, and hope to see you out there at next week's webinar for the 430 to 440 upgrade. That's about all I've got for today. If we do have some questions, guys, be happy to field them now. Otherwise, I appreciate you guys for coming out. So what do we got in the chat, guys?
Yeah, hey Mike, real quick, and I know you covered this, I just want to stress it again, because we do see a lot of customers that reach out that have not registered their unit or their products on myavidyne.com. So please remember to, if you have a chance now, if you haven't already, go to myavidyne.com and register your unit. But yeah, a lot of questions around the checklist. Once a checklist is entered, can the checklist pop up based on geolocation? Example, before landing, pop up within X miles of destination.
No, I wouldn't say that. I would essentially say that's no different than reaching into that pocket and pulling out your paper checklist, right? Just getting in the habit of going to your utilities tab and just pulling up a checklist, should you choose to utilize the checklist on the IFD. Don't think that we can have it pop up automatically though.
Yep. And then Joe asked about data blocks on the left side of the IFD 440. Are you able to customize that? Is there not enough room?
Usually there's not enough room. Yeah, with the 440, because the screen is so small, it tends to get used up by the line select keys that are there, or the COM or nav blocks. Now with the 4 series, you also notice that you only have one of each type, either the COM or the nav available as data blocks on the left side. And of course, we toggle those just by pushing that left button. There's just not a whole lot of real estate on the left side of the 4 series to really get some custom data blocks for that.
Perfect, thank you. Does the Avidyne IFD 550, 540 version 10.3 interface with the STEC 3100 version 1.4 for VNAV function? And I believe they were specifically talking about with an Aspen.
Yeah, and I would refer to the certification on the Aspen for that, because when we get into those types of autopilots with the way that they're wired, essentially how that whole system works is we send GPS and nav information to the in this case the Aspen, and then the Aspen is actually what is actually driving the STEC. So that's more of a question more between Aspen and STEC. I'm pretty sure, but I don't want to speculate. All right, so that's really more of an Aspen question.
Thank you.
Hey Mike, I had one real quick. So it's about top of descent function. So top of descent, when you're going to an airport, is it possible, I know this is normally en route, but is it possible to do top of descent to an airport? And if so, could it be at pattern altitude or to the runway elevation?
So there is a start descent, begin descent cast message that will show up based on, now you have to have your down path waypoint has to have an altitude constraint. And that's where you'll get the begin descent, and it'll be a begin descent countdown timer. So kind of the reverse, right? If we're coming into an airport, that's what we need. The IFD just needs to know what altitude on my next waypoint do I need to be at, and then it can then calculate based on all the factors when to start your descent. And it will tell you. It'll give you a cast message.
And another one. Does the and I'm not sure I fully understand this, does the IFD 550 get the traffic information from a Lynx 9000, so the NGT 9000, or is it the onboard ADSB if equipped? So the NGT 9000 should be your ADSB.
That's an ADS. That's a dual band ADSB receiver. We are the primary reseller for that. So reach out to your Avidyne dealer if you're looking to purchase an NGT 9000. Absolutely, your Avidyne dealer definitely has the plug on NGT 9000s.
Yeah. So Wayne, Wayne, if I misunderstood that question, if you could clarify, I appreciate that. Are the checklists preserved between firmware updates?
Yeah, they should be saved between firmware updates. There's nothing definitive that says that it will be lost between a firmware update. The possibility always exists that it could if an issue arises, but the intent is not for the checklist to be lost through a software update.
Now, I know one of the things we encourage when the software update's being performed is to save all your or back up your user settings on a USB. Would that help with that issue if it did occur?
What we don't want to do is we don't want to load those same settings through a software update. Right?
Yep.
We can save them if an issue arises where those checklists are lost. They would have to be manually re-entered. Now the benefit with 10.3 is now we can upload them from a computer file, from like a CSV. So it's a whole lot easier than having to manually plug them back in. Now keep in mind, that's not the typical behavior in a software update if you lose all that. The message that we don't want to get across is that it's okay to download all of your settings and then do a software update and then load them back in, because that alone can cause issues as you're going from one software level to another. You shouldn't have to do that. Okay, and that can cause some problems. So we do say in that case to kind of manually enter all that stuff, and it's really for your config settings is where we would do that. So then again, that's not the behavior that we're expecting to see through a software. Like you're not going to lose all those settings, all those checklists from a normal software update. There's no need to re-enter those.
And one more quick one here, Mike. So standby comm frequencies on the audio page, on the audio setup page. Standby squelch on or off. What exactly is the purpose, or how does the functionality change when you select on or off?
So remember, if squelch is on, that is automatic squelch. If we turn it off, then we're going to get all that static. Now I can't demonstrate that. I don't have an audio output on this, but using my 540 as an example, if I turn my squelch off, that's basically it's just like turning your squelch off on your radio, right? You're going to get all that static. If you turn it on, it's an automatic squelch level system in a digital radio. We don't have a squelch knob to fine tune it. Squelch is either in a digital radio, it either is or it isn't. It's either on or it's off, right? And it's an automatic squelch tuning thing if we have that squelch turned on.
All right, Mike, and a last question, I believe, on the top of descent answer just mentioned, can a feature be added to get the range to top of descent in nautical miles and minutes be displayed? It would be nice to be able to tell ATC when you want to start descent. Is this a feature? Is this a 10.3 feature maybe?
I would say because it's based off of your down path waypoint, if we have an altitude constraint set, we can see that. We should be able to see that here. So look in there. If this doesn't do it, if this doesn't answer his question, then shoot us an email and we can explore that further. But essentially, like let's say if I had an altitude constraint at EAU and if I wanted to cross it at 5,000 feet, I'm still going to be 22 miles and 7 minutes from there. I think that may answer the question, but if not, just shoot us an email. We can explore that a little bit further. But if that's all we've got, I appreciate everybody for coming out. I know these have been kind of a longer format of webinars that we've had lately, but Then again, if you guys have gotten any information out of these webinars, I've done my job, and I'm happy to do it, and I love doing it. So thank you guys all for coming out. This webinar will be available on our website and on YouTube here shortly. So I appreciate it. Thank you guys for spending your Thursday afternoon with us, and we will definitely see you on the next webinar. Thanks, guys.